Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from yarkspirifantasyart.com and welcome to another illustration video tutorial. So for this week's video tutorial, the request that I received was actually that I draw a dragon rider. So for obvious reasons I wanted to include a dragon along with its rider in a dynamic pose to really help show the relationship between the two characters. Now, what you'll see in this video is the initial 6 hours of painting, but what I did afterwards was not recorded because essentially this drawing actually took up to 20 hours to do, mainly because I was experimenting with some different brushes and seeing how far I could take those brushes before it looked like too much information. So since those were more experimental and were after the fact, I did not include them in recording, but at the end of this video you will see the final version of this image. So as you can see right now, I am working on the rough drawing sketch essentially of this drawing, and I've chosen a yellow as my main color for the entire scene. I've chosen this color for a couple of reasons. The main reason is because I want to have a fire-breathing dragon, because who doesn't want to have a fire-breathing dragon as a pet? Because I wanted to include this type of dragon, I did want to have more of a yellowish tone. Now you will see later on that I actually change a lot of the colors in the piece. The main reason why I do that is essentially to help balance out the yellows so that's not too overpowering. Now, what's going to be unusual in this drawing, and you can kind of see some basic information that's already been placed in this drawing at this time, is this dragon is actually essentially scaling inside of a cave and cavern. So this rider is actually trying to get to somebody, and he knows essentially that this cave is not too deep and that his dragon can actually follow him. And because his opponent does have quite a bit of skill and prowess, he knows he can't beat him without the help of his dragon, so he's taking advantage of his dragon's size to act as a essentially a psychological trigger for his opponent. So right now you can see that I've actually added some cooler tones to this drawing, more in the background elements or any areas that are essentially in shadow. By doing this, it really pops forward some of the yellows that I already have. It also helps distinguish some of the background elements from the foreground elements as well. Now at this stage I am still keeping everything extremely rough. I have actually switched to a soft round brush at this point in time, and I'm essentially experimenting with just how much detail I want to have in this drawing before I actually start moving on to the rest of the limbs and the rest of the detail. Once again, I tend to pick out the main focal point as a starting point for my drawings and figure out just how much detail I'm going to add into that point before I start adding information to the rest of the drawing. By doing this, it helps ensure that the most detailed area is the focal point. Obviously, certain technical areas could be more technically inclined, so I may decide to focus on that instead. But in this case, because I did want the head of the dragon to be essentially the focal point, I did work on that first and foremost to figure out what I was actually going to do before I actually started working on the rest of it. So right now I'm just adding the claws, and you will see quite a bit more detail in the final version for even the claws and the head. Those two have quite a bit of more information that's been added afterwards. So I'm adding some bluer tones, and I'm still using the soft round brush at this point, just adding the basic information in, trying to figure out just how much information and how much detail I'm going to have in the different elements for these characters. And I'm just working on essentially the dragon rider right now. Still not too happy with the shadows, so I'm just tweaking and playing around with them. By playing around with a lot of these things, you can have actually a lot of fun with the drawings, so I keep on working on these areas until I'm happy with something, and then I just apply it to the rest of the character and the illustration. So I will be switching fairly quickly and shortly to a more textured brush. Essentially what I did to create this texture brush is I created a 200 pixel by 200 pixel file set to grayscale, and I also limited the colors because obviously you don't need colors when you're creating a brush. It's essentially a grayscale element, and whatever color you have will actually cause the different effects for the brush. So for this reason, I just saved it as a grayscale element. I have at this point actually started using the texture brush. As you may have noticed, I started first on the claw because it was a more minor area. The technical area is mostly the face, so now I'm actually starting to incorporate that into the rest of the face. Back to customizing brush. It's not too difficult to do. It's actually very easy. You essentially just create a 200 by 200 pixel image, and in the center you're going to actually draw out your brush shape, and then you save this as a new preset. I believe it's in the edit button, and you just save that as new preset, and there you go. You have your brush that's been added to your existing brushes at the bottom of the page. Now if you want to change the brush orders, which I do recommend you do, you can do that in the preset manager afterwards. So right now I'm playing with a bit with the teeth, seeing just how much information I can add before it's just too much information in this. And at this stage, I'm not exactly happy with the amount of information I have, so I actually do go through quite a few different iterations before I actually settle on the final design. And this was essentially more of a practice, more of a test piece, because I was using a heavily textured brush. It's a brush I normally don't use for most of my pieces. Normally you don't need it. Normally it adds a bit too much information within the brush, but I was able to get a good compromise between the two, so possibly I might use it in the future. Tentatively, it's not very likely at this point, but it is possible. Just working on the claws right now, and I'm still using that texture brush that I talked about, and I keep on going back and forth between adding information and pulling it back. And at this point, although I do this on a regular basis for even my regular illustrations, at this point I'm just trying to feel the boundaries of this brush to figure out just how much it's going to actually affect my overall drawing. So adding some more information for the teeth, experimenting with some more lighting, seeing just how much information I need to add in there. I didn't like the information I already had, so I just started painting over it, resampling the colors. Adding a bit more information onto the bottom of that mouth, because I really want the structure to show properly in this drawing, so I do spend quite a bit of time on the face at least. Working on toning back some of that information by adding a bit of darker shadows, and working on that other side of the face which isn't fully developed yet, and trying to balance actually the actual structure that I currently have. Working out the claws and arms. Now I have used this brush at a very low opacity at this point, because overdoing the opacity will add too much of a harsh texture to this, so for this reason I'm using a very low opacity. Quickly adding some additional information below the character to help show essentially the size and the confines of this cave, because essentially this cave is very restrictive to this dragon. And since this character has a dragon rider, I decided to add a giant collar to him, and I experimented with adding dangling chains to him and all that. It's not very functional, but it does look pretty cool, which is why I experimented with adding it in. You will see later on that I actually modified the structure of that collar to make sure that it is correct as well. So just started adding some chains. And all of this is, once again, extremely loose. I don't need to add too much information because it is further off in the background. It's further away from the viewer. So adding information for the knight. The knight does have to read, so because he is the dragon rider, and that is part of the focus of this illustration is to show the dragon rider itself. I do have to add enough information to make him pop as well. Looking at the legs, the cape, general helmet structure. And I'm just sampling the colors that I already have in my canvas because I have actually quite a fairly wide range of colors at the moment. Looking at those background elements once again, trying to increase some of those highlights. You will notice in the final image as well that essentially I've decided to darken a lot of elements as well, just to help balance them out a bit further. Now, unlike most weeks, because I do have a very hearty list currently for video requests, I will not be taking any requests for at least the next 6-7 weeks, just because I have quite a few currently on the list. If some of you guys still want some drawings done, I may have to add a voting system just to make sure that everybody gets an even chance. So obviously you're going to have to vote for the drawing that you want to have for the following week's video tutorial. So if that's the case, obviously you may want to have some of your friends help vote in for you, because if they don't, well, obviously there's less of a likelihood of your image being chosen. But as it stands, I will finish up the 7 requests that I currently have in the queue. And once those are done, then I may have to go to essentially a voting system just to help ensure that everybody gets an even and equal chance to get their images done. So this image is almost completed, and here's the final illustration that you can see. I added quite a bit of information in that dragon and the rider, and I also changed a lot of the lighting to really emphasize the scale and also the power that's essentially emanating from this dragon character. So I really hope you guys liked and enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.